Welcome back to every naval battle in history. Buckle up, get the sheets in the cleats, and clear for action. In this episode, we are taking on the biggest naval battle at sea in human history. It's the Republic of Rome and the Empire of Carthage in the heavyweight clash for the ages off the south coast of Sicily. This, dear viewer, is the Battle of Ecnomus. In previous episodes, we've covered how Carthaginian adventurers provoked the war against a Roman state that didn't know how to stop fighting. The Romans built new fleets, trained new crews, found new ways to fight at sea, particularly with a powered boarding plank called the corvus, which created land battles at sea. They took Carthage by surprise and won victory after victory at sea while dominating on the land. But there's a lot to suggest that in the early stage of the First Punic War, the Carthaginians simply weren't concentrating, and what the Romans were dealing with was essentially local colonial forces in Sicily. All this changes in 256 BCE when the Romans gather an invasion fleet to attack North Africa to lay siege to the city of Carthage itself. Now, once again, I'll remind viewers that we are utterly reliant in this history on the writings of Polybius, who is a Roman source of Greek extraction. But on the bright side, Polybius appears to have been a pretty good historian for his time, and where it has been possible to check his facts, they're solid. And so, in late spring, the Carthaginians finally concentrate their fleet, having allowed major elements to be destroyed in isolation by massed Roman forces. They sailed to the great fortress port of Lilybaeum in Sicily, now known as Marsala, and from there they sailed east along the south coast of Sicily, meeting up with the local naval forces for a combined fleet of 350 ships, under the joint command of a dude called Hanno and a dude called Hamilcar. Regular viewers will know that almost all Carthaginian names in the Roman histories are either Hanno, Hamilcar, or Hannibal. There are no Hannibals here, so we've missed the bingo. The ships were almost all quinqueremes, which is 30 banks of 5 rowers down each side, 3 oars to a bank, some oars with 2 rowers, some with 1, and 100 or so soldiers and deck crew for around 400 men aboard each ship. Their main weapon was the great bronze ram mounted in the bow. This could either cut enemy oars, causing mayhem and carnage in the packed galleries of rowers, or pierce the ship, hopefully causing it to break up. The Romans in turn mustered their fleet at Ostia, around 330 warships, also mostly quinqueremes, and a large number of towed transports full of horses. The horse barges were being towed by the warships. In command of the Romans were both their consuls, something like a co-president, Lucius Manlius Vulso Longus, and the soon-to-become legendary Marcus Attilius Regulus, who came from a family of so many consuls you'd have to take your mittens off to count them. The 2 consuls were both in larger hexaremes, with an extra rower in each bank. Meeting up with the Roman army in Sicily, they loaded their ships up with legionnaires. All up, the Roman force had 140,000 men to the Carthaginian 150,000, and hundreds of horses. So let's compare this to the other great naval battles of history. 680 warships at Ecnomus. This doesn't include the transports. At Trafalgar, there were 73. In the 20th century at Jutland, there were 250. At Leyte Gulf in World War II, 367. Cape Ecnomus dwarfs them all. In terms of manpower deployed, Leyte Gulf was around 200,000 to the 290,000 at Cape Ecnomus. As for the numbers of horses involved in a naval battle, nothing is getting close to this one. There is an asterisk on this, however. The Battle of Lake Poyang in China in 1363, on a freshwater lake no less, involved 850,000 combatants and around 1,200 ships. The vessels were large floating siege engines, but they wouldn't have withstood the wind and waves at sea. It feels strange to qualify largest naval battle fought at sea, but we live in a strange world. For a long time, modern people thought the numbers used by the ancients had to be wild fabrications. They're just so huge. But the archaeology keeps supporting that these numbers were real. So the Romans are off to Africa. They've got their soldiers and their horses loaded up. They are sailing along the south coast of Sicily. And the single worst thing that can happen to an amphibious invasion force happens to them. The absolute worst thing. They are intercepted by the concentrated fleet of their enemies. This was no doubt the moment the Carthaginians thought they had won the war. They had a larger force. They did not have transports full of horses in tow, or ships overloaded with land troops, and they had hundreds of years of naval experience to draw on. One of the things they didn't have was the experienced crews they had started the war with, because they had frittered them away at Mylae and Sulci and Tyndaris. It can be dangerous for a commander to attempt tactics which his previously experienced force could perform, but his new recruits are not up to. In the initial disposition, the Romans very cleverly had two columns allied in echelon to form a single wedge. In echelon means one deployed to the side and behind the other. It's a term that only the French evolved around the 17th century. It was used before then, most notably by Alexander the Great. But here we see it used at sea in a way that certainly is not described in other sources. Although at the Battle of Arginusae, the Athenian staggered double line sort of came close, but this is a real evolution. The two columns aligned in echelon formed a single wedge. This allowed their ships to support each other from ramming attack like a cascading series of wingmen, and protected their flanks and rear from ramming attacks. If the Carthaginians came from the front, then the corvus would come into play, and instead of being overloaded with soldiers, suddenly the Romans had a real advantage in a savage infantry battle at sea. Two other Roman squadrons were protecting the front and rear of the transports. The Carthaginians, thinking with a lot of good reason that they held an advantage and the killing season had arrived, deployed in a fishhook formation. It looks as though they were trying to keep the Romans from finding the safety of the shore. So enthusiastic were they to get into the Roman transports that they left the centre of their line to fight the two Roman lead squadrons, while the Carthaginian wings attacked the front and rear of the transport formation. The centre of the Carthaginian line then withdrew to pull the Roman fighting vanguard further away from the transports. At this point, it looks as if the Carthaginians have overcomplicated their battle. Rather than use their concentrated superior force, and the fact that one of the Roman squadrons is towing horse transports, to destroy part of the enemy fleet, they tried to attack everywhere. In turn, the Roman central squadron, having cut their transports loose, managed to evade the Carthaginian fishhook and deployed facing outwards from the coast, also denying their flanks. This manoeuvre did have the extreme disadvantage of leaving thousands of horses drifting through the middle of the biggest naval battle in history, at sea, but on the plus side, the transport towing squadron was occupying a third of the Carthaginian fleet with relatively few losses, freeing up the other Roman ships to do very unpleasant things to their enemies. I would like to note at this point that these diagrams have been done by myself. I'm quite proud of them, but they don't represent actual scale or numbers. They're just trying to give you a sense of the movement of the squadrons. Meanwhile, the rearmost Roman squadron had a bad day, but they kept their counterparts busy. This left the concentrated Roman vanguard in their beautiful echelon wedge formation, driving through what had been the Carthaginian centre. The Carthaginian fleet's feigned withdrawal became a real one, and that left the foremost Roman squadrons to turn on the rears of the detached Carthaginian wings, which is a bloody horrible thing to happen to your fleet, and at this point the tide of human history has wildly turned. Carthage lost 30 ships sunk and 64 captured. Between 30,000 and 40,000 Carthaginian sailors were killed or captured, to 10,000 Romans and 24 Roman ships sunk. This is bad for Carthage any which way, but when you consider the Roman Republic had 5 times the manpower to draw on, it's a staggering disaster. Add the insult to the injury that Carthage had the larger force at the start of the battle, and the Romans were encumbered by the transport fleet they were towing, and it was an unforgivable debacle by the Carthaginian leaders. Carthage lost the future of the world in this one afternoon of folly and failure. Rome couldn't win this day, but Carthage lost, when they had everything going for them. In the short term, the Carthaginian fleet had succeeded in halting the invasion. The Romans had to land in Sicily to put their fleet back together, but they would effect a landing later in the year. This war was far from over. There are many battles still to talk about in the First Punic War alone. But if Carthage had appeared disinterested in the conflict before Cape Ecnomus, they knew they were in a fight afterwards. This has been a long episode, as you might expect, but I wanted to talk about Marcus Atilius Regulus, as this is his last naval battle, and, well, let me tell you the story. The next year, having won some battles in Africa, and crucially losing one, Regulus was captured near Tunis. The Carthaginians released him on parole to convey their peace terms to the Roman Senate. Marcus Atilius Regulus travelled back to his home city, delivered the Carthaginian terms to his fellow senators, and then did something which wins him a place in the big bronze balls Hall of Fame. He told his fellow senators to reject the peace terms and keep the war going. He then followed it up by honouring his parole and returning to captivity in Carthage, something he totally could have chosen not to do. He died in that captivity in 250 BCE. The war would not end until 241. Some later Roman sources say he was tortured by the Carthaginians in lurid ways, but considering the more contemporary sources don't mention that part, I'm going to defend the Carthaginians' honour here. He died of natural causes. Anyway, Marcus Atilius Regulus wins the biggest naval battle in history. Okay, biggest naval battle at sea in history, and it's only the second coolest thing he's remembered for. Strap in, folks, we've got lots more to cover as we take on every naval battle in history. Smash those like and subscribe buttons, ring that bell, you don't want to get left behind.